stress is not only a cause of autoimmunity, but it also can be an effect. I was stressed, so I have this diagnosis, then this diagnosis makes me more stressed, and so it can pull us down. Knowing that that's the pattern, finding a way to limit that chronic stress is one of the most beneficial things that we can do.
80% of autoimmune disease patients are women. Hashimoto's thyroiditis, lupus disease, Graves' disease, celiac disease, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis. Why is it that women are more likely to develop these conditions? What actually is an autoimmune disease? And where does current treatment fall short? Today on the Roots of Wellness podcast, we have Dr. Amy Beheimer. Dr. Amy is a doctor of pharmacy and a nationally board certified health and wellness coach who specializes with helping people create sustainable lifestyle habit changes to help improve life with a chronic illness. With her extensive academic background and her personal experience being diagnosed with multiple autoimmune disease conditions, Amy is here to help us demystify this somewhat elusive chronic disease and help us uncover how big of a role we can actually play in improving symptoms and restoring our quality of life. This episode is for anybody who is struggling with an autoimmune disease condition or they know anybody in their life that is. So share this episode with anybody who you know is struggling and can benefit from having some advice. Thank you for listening and welcome back to the podcast. Let's get into our conversation with Dr. Amy Beheimer.
Oh, jumping straight into it. I love it. The biggest myth is in the words autoimmune disease. I know for me, and I know for, so many others, we get this diagnosis and it can really feel like our life is now driven by disease, an autoimmune disease. And so I think that can be a myth. It is a myth. I think that we still have a lot of health in us and a lot of health that we can create. And so if we shift our focus to that and really start to find evidence for how that's true, then we can end up living a completely different life than if we would have if we never questioned it and instead thought, okay, I have this disease and this is just the way my life is going to be now.
Would you be able to share a little bit about your experience of getting your diagnosis and how you maybe initially perceived autoimmune disease and what made you realize that you can live like a healthful life with this condition?
Absolutely. I got my first diagnosis when I was 17, so many moons ago. And at that point, it was on my skin. There wasn't much of a risk with that diagnosis. It's called vitiligo. So I didn't really change much. But then I went to pharmacy school in my early 20s. And I started learning about how these diagnoses tend to cluster, meaning if you get one, then another one may be coming. And I started to get this little oh no, are there more coming? And sure enough, at 25, a autoimmune thyroid disease was next. It's called Graves. And that still wasn't the last of it. It was at 27 that I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, yet another autoimmune disease. And just as I described before, the initial thought was, wow, I have a chronic, debilitating, neuroprogressive disease. Now, how am I going to, make the most of a life with this disease that up until that point, I really hadn't questioned as being a bad thing, or a negative thing. And so it wasn't until I was shown by my first coach that, oh, wow, that thought that life always has to be a little bit worse or this disease needs to be a bad thing, that's an optional thought that if I wanted to, I could shift it and I could instead turn the focus, turn the attention on the parts of my body that were still working really well and inevitably create health in different ways, mentally, physically, emotionally, that I never would have without the diagnosis. So, it really is my own journey through this that enabled me to see kind of what was missing from the conversation about autoimmunity and hopefully fill the gap for other people who don't want to accept the narrative that, okay, now we're just tired or it's progressive or things are just always going to be a little bit worse, but instead it could be a little bit better.
Autoimmune diseases, it seems more misunderstood amongst the general public. And I mean, even as I was looking into it more, I was like, I didn't even realize this was like, would be categorized as an autoimmune condition. So could we help get everyone like on the same page? What is an autoimmune disease? What are the actually like conditions that are part of that diagnosis?
There's a lot out there. And I think the overwhelming thought that people have is, oh, that's bad, right? They hear autoimmune, they're like, oh, that's bad. What's happening actually in our body is that we have an immune system, and it's made up of all types of different cells. And the job of the immune system is to protect us from anything that is foreign. So it could keep cells that want to replicate and become cancer diagnoses. It could keep that at bay. It can ward off infections. I mean, it is such a necessary part of our bodies. But what happens is in autoimmunity, the immune system mistakes our real native tissue for a foreign invader. And so it thinks it's helping us, but it ends up that it starts to attack parts of us that are natural and normal. And that's what makes autoimmunity so, I think, overwhelming to some and confusing, is that that process can happen in any system of our body, on any tissue or any organ. And so if you live with autoimmunity, you could have it in your thyroid, for example, and it could be Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. If it's in your joints, it could look like rheumatoid arthritis. In your nervous system would be MS. In your gut would be either a ulcerative colitis or a Crohn's disease, and so on and so forth. Your pancreas would be a type 1 diabetes. And so that's a lot of different specialties. That's a lot of different doctors that come in to help manage the situation. And so sometimes it can feel like, wait, I don't really have one person helping me understand what's happening, because it's so fragmented, because it can happen anywhere. So even with myself and with so many people I work with, one of them was in my skin, one was in my nervous system. I had signs in my gut, and another one was in my thyroid. So no wonder we get a little bit confused and overwhelmed. At this point, there's anywhere, the number varies, but 80 to 110 different diagnoses. And those are changing all the time because we keep learning new things. And we think that, and I'm saying we being the collective medical world, they think, okay, we think it's this. No, actually, maybe it's this. And so it's an evolving situation to try to understand what's really happening. And so the things we're going to talk about, the good news is, even though all that has a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unanswered questions, what we know at the root of all of it is that if we have better habits in how we think and how we feel in our lifestyle, then our bodies are going to be set up for success. So it doesn't matter where the autoimmunity is manifesting. Things we're going to talk about work for all of us.
I feel like another part of the overwhelm is like maybe not understanding how someone went from healthy and like nothing being wrong to all of a sudden, how does my immune system start to attack? Could you talk about the role of genetics, but then also our environment in like signaling that change?
From what we can tell, there is, again, like you said, this genetics piece. Let's go ahead and say that's 10 to 30% of the equation. We can kind of agree, all right, there's not much we can do about that, right? We kind of make peace with the fact that there are some things that are more fixed that maybe we have no control over. The other 70 to 90% of the pie, let's use a fun word, the other 70 to 90% of the pie is our lifestyle, our habits, our environment. That is the part that we like to shift our focus to because we have more control. And one of the first things that I like to say about all of that is, even though we have more control of those, there is no use ever to look back and say, oh my gosh, if I would have done this different, then this wouldn't have happened, and use the fact that we can influence or control these things as a reason to beat ourselves up or as a reason to blame ourselves. Way too many people, when we start working together, they think that they did something wrong and that they should have done something different. And it's just not useful, because we just need to love those past versions of ourselves. And now moving forward, say, okay, now what? How do I want to influence this from here on out? The common triggers that are often associated with the diagnosis is, a stressful event. that can happen in people's lives. And so again, something in us, we were set up to potentially be more prone to get a diagnosis, and a stressful life event could be the reason that it ends up happening.
The three main causes, or the three little villains in the story, if we were to kind of expose them a little bit, who would you kind of line up as top three?
I like that image. Well, there's going to be 6.
Okay.
So
6.
we have 6, and it's a framework that I teach and live, and hopefully everybody listening can remember, because that's the power of frameworks, is that our brains can remember them, and it can help us sort through, like we said, all this information of things I could be doing, but instead recognizing that it all fits into one of these 6 key areas, which allows us to get more comfortable, get more grounded, settle in. And instead of seeing these are all the things I should be doing or that I need to fix, these are the areas. These are I call them spokes, because the framework is called the Habit Hub for Autoimmune Health. And so these are the 6 areas that I get to experiment with, and that I get to pull and use as levers to influence how I function and how I feel. And so again, 6 sounds like a lot, but we have a whole lifetime to look at these and to, give them love, because these are each areas that we can, experience big wins and big gains for our bodies in. And so number 1 is, oh goodness, so important, because it's its own spoke, but it's also influencing all the other ones, and it's mindset. I like to call them inner habits. I like to call them the ones that are happening below the surface, right? So you're looking at me, but you're not seeing how I'm thinking and how I'm feeling. Only I really know how I am habitually thinking and feeling about my diagnosis, about my life, about my health. And so really recognizing that how we think matters, how we feel matters, not only in our day-to-day, but also in how our bodies function, is why this is number 1 when it comes to how are we going to take some level of control or have influence over our health.
What would be the best tool to help people actually make meaningful change? I feel like sometimes mindset change can seem like, how do I know if this journaling is working? Because I feel like it's more invisible build over time, maybe. What have you seen has been a helpful tool for that?
You are so spot on. I say it's often intangible. It can feel intangible. And if we are not there, right? If you are listening and you're like, Amy, that is great that you think your life is not worse, but I am not there. That is not my mindset. Someone telling you to think this way is not going to cut it. Reading more and more quotes is not going to cut it. I like to say that I show the work behind how we actually shift our mindset. And the approach that I use and I teach and I coach is a habit-based approach. So just like the things that I'm eating or the way that I'm moving are habits that I'm building over time, how I think and how I feel, those are habitual too. So it's just comfortable at first for my body to go to those maybe unuseful thoughts like, this is scary, this is bad, I'm exhausted. That's the comfortable habitual thing that our body is kind of trained to do, because that's what it's always done. And so what we do is we take it thought by thought, because what is a mindset? It is a collection of our thoughts. And we're not going to shift it all at once. But again, finding 1 or 2 to start that, okay, if I believed this or thought this, would I feel better? Would I be feeling more empowered to get out there and, change other habits and things like that? Those are the ones that we want to start with. And it's not a sexy answer, but it takes conscious repetition. It takes practicing it. It takes doing repetitions just like you would a bicep curl over and over again, and sticking with it until we make those more useful, more feel-good thoughts the habitual ones that we do.
I think that also makes it feel more accessible, because you don't put the expectations of I'm supposed to feel better after this information that I've just said. It's going deeper.
Yeah. And what that looks like, in my club, I have a membership where, we go through each of these 6 areas and we just start to layer habit on top of habit on top of habit that helps us feel and function better. And so when we are doing this together, that looks like identifying the one that we want to practice, right? We want to make our new belief, because a belief is just a thought that we have thought so many times that we believe it. We think it's capital T true. And so an example would be, let's see, a good one that a lot of us can benefit from believing and shifting to is that, I don't have to do anything to deserve rest, or rest is a productive act. So many of us, and I'm raising my hand that I'm included.
Me too.
we kind of put rest after the rest and after the rest of the things that we're actually doing. And so imagine if we really believed that rest was a part of the plan and that rest was productive and that we didn't have to do anything to deserve it, but instead our bodies may let us know when it needs to rest and we can honor that. If we practice that, it may take a month, it may take 2 months, it may take 3 months. I can't promise you how long it'll take. But if we keep redirecting our brain every time we're frustrated that we need to rest, or every time we try to skip over the thing that is actually relaxing or the thing that's going to help us get better sleep, if we keep redirecting our brain to that, then all of a sudden we may notice that we're thinking that without even thinking about it. We're like, oh my gosh, I just took 20 minutes to rest because I believe this is a part of the plan. And so that's just one example where, if somebody inside the membership has that, then, they'll come in and they'll share it every single day. I'm doing a repetition. I'm practicing it. Here's the evidence I found for why it worked. I actually rested and I noticed this energy, and like we nurture that. I call it a belief seed because it starts as a little seedling that needs it needs attention, it needs time, it needs sunlight, it needs fertilizer, and it needs to be nurtured until it can grow strong and can be a belief on its own. And so, yeah, the image of a seed, when we plant a seed, we're not eating the fruit of it today, right? We have to give it time, but there is nothing more worth our time than shifting the things that we believe so that we end up, in states throughout the day where we are feeling like we are capable and able to really influence our future health and how we feel.
This links right to the stress point about how we have external stresses, but then also the internal stresses of our own beliefs. I wanted to make sure that we cover all of the pillars. So we have mindset.
The next 4 are ones that everybody's heard of. Again, this is nothing new. It's hopefully just an approach that makes it make sense together, right? And sees how it's holistic. So number 2 is food. I mean, we're all nodding. We all know food influences how we feel and how we function. So food. Number 3.
Can I dive into
Oh,
food
yeah,
a little?
of course.
My nutrition brain's like, let's talk about food.
Yes.
It's like when you have clients come to you, are there any dietary habits that kind of show up consistently?
For sure. And I'm the first to say I'm not a dietitian. I don't want to be a dietitian. But there are some pretty basics that we know help our bodies thrive. So most everyone, if I ask someone, right? So if you come to me, Georgie, and you're like, I have no idea what to do for food. What should I do? Well, you could ask AI or Google and you could get 500 million options that conflict with each other and they're confusing. Or I could say, what are 3 things you think that would help you feel better? I guarantee you have 3 things that you know that if you just followed through on them, you would feel better. And so most consistently, those are limiting sugar, limiting processed foods, adding more fruits and vegetables. And then there are a whole lot more nuance related to that. We can get into proteins and we can get into grains, or some people consider no gluten or no dairy. There's all these nuances, but it really is just putting on an experimenter's mindset, starting with the things that you would feel better, and then learning how to actually follow through on those so that you can actually get to see how your body does with it. Because you can read online about what happens in other people when they change this or that about their diet. But the only information that I care about is what happens when you do it and when you follow through on it and when you make it habitual, because that's the best real life information you're ever going to get. You may tweak something, add something, limit something, and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that I could feel this good. And so that is just a huge part, is starting with the first couple things, getting really good at those, and worrying about the nuances further down the line.
Mm. What would you say to somebody who is looking to make changes to their diet, but maybe like they're feeling stressed and overwhelmed by trying to make sure everything is perfect? Is there a benefit in having that perfect diet, or is there room for a little bit of like flexibility for the sake of your own like sanity, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a exercise, um, a strategy that I teach called a feel good food protocol. It is created by you, and then we help you follow through on it. A part of that feel good food protocol is often what I call joy eats. So sometimes having food on that protocol that is for no other reason than it brings you joy is a huge part of the plan. And when you look ahead with intention, so let's say you're looking at the month and you're like, you know what? I have a birthday celebration coming up. I have vacation this day. And you decide, I think that I want to be able to eat dessert, let's say 4 days this month for these different celebrations. That is a really thoughtful plan that isn't undermining what you know you want. It's instead being inclusive of real life, right? Because if these things don't work in real life, then they're not going to cut it. And so that could be the first plan. And a lot of people start with that. I have to say, though, after a few months of doing that, when they quiet the noise from a lot of ultra processed foods or sugar, they may notice that, oh, wow, actually, when I plan these joy eats, I don't really like how I feel, and it doesn't really bring me as much joy as I thought. So maybe I'll change it and do it a little bit
Yeah.
less, or change it. So it's an evolving protocol. And again, that you set based on the science, and it grows and it changes with you. And having that experimenter's mindset is everything. But I have a strategy playbook. It's called the ABC Habit Playbook. There's 20 strategies for how to make and break habits, because that's what we really care about, is the skill. How do we make and break habits? And so we use that playbook to be able to make it in a way that we don't feel deprived. So these various things that I'm kind of mentioning are kind of pulling from the different plays, and I won't, bother everybody and confuse them more with the different strategies. But
No, they sound
it,
awesome. Yeah,
it's
thank you.
very science driven, so that,
Mhm.
yeah, because we want to set ourselves up for success. And thank goodness there are people out there that are studying how to make these changes. And I just get to be the person who goes and digs deep and pulls it out, and hopefully presents it in a way that is usable and applicable again in real life.
We have our tool belt. Tool belt is growing. We have mindset and that tool being journaling, that like consistent repetition. And then with food, asking ourselves, what things do I know are not really making me feel good? What do I know would be probably a better choice?
People come to me, they have a plan from a nutritionist or a dietitian, or something that they've read that they want to follow. That's a great place to start too. It's more the follow through that may be missing.
That's where the habit frameworks come in. So like, let's say
Absolutely.
someone's like starting to implement change. What habit framework tools would you give someone trying to make nutritional changes? It's like a lot of mental energy to like want to make changes in that area.
I'll give 3 that come to mind. One is trust in the tiny. That's a strategy that is derived from tiny habits or the 2-minute rule. But trust in the tiny is pulling in the mindset piece, that we can trust that tiny changes will add up. Because if we believed that we could trust in the tiny, we would do tiny changes. And so with food, that may mean only worry about breakfast right now. How do we make breakfast more habitual and more life-giving and more energizing and more, fiber-filled, or whatever you're trying to do, protein? Start with breakfast. Or maybe it looks like adding 1 new vegetable this week. Like, trust that tiny changes do add up. Those become the new norm. I often with clients start with, looking at what is 1 or 2 meals that you would love to be able to make without even thinking, because that's what a habit is, right? You grab those groceries, you know how to throw it together, and it feels easy. If you do that 1 meal at a time, all of a sudden it doesn't take too long until you are in the habit of, reaching for those things that are more nutritious. So trust in the tiny is one. master planning, having that plan, that forward thought of what will this week or this month look like. That's another strategy that is super key. And another strategy is getting more specific. So if you have to answer the question, what am I going to eat for the rest of my life? That's kind of what feels overwhelming, right? What's this huge plan I have to make? But let's calm it down. Let's say this week. Let's run a 2-week experiment, or let's tweak this food or experiment with removing this, group of foods. Getting specific and reducing the overwhelm by making ourselves focus on just certain meals or just certain things is really quite a relieving feeling when we realize we don't have to boil the ocean all at once.
Definitely. And that's why I love that everything's broken up into all these separate steps, because it seems more achievable. And
but that's actually the science at play too. Following a framework is a play from the playbook, because science shows that when we can remember it and it can be sticky and we can learn it, and the framework doesn't change every month, but instead you learn it and then you just keep getting good at it, that's what works. So the meta skill here that we're doing is following frameworks, because again, they work with you. They're not my framework. You come in and you do what Amy says. I'm giving you the tools to help to learn how to tap into what you want, what you need, and help you follow through on it.
And I guess also by learning these new frameworks, you also come to understand that you've been following this other invisible framework for the rest of your life. I feel like, we think this is just how we are, and I just think like this, but then you realize, oh, if this is a framework, then I can shift off to somewhere else, and then that becomes another empowering move where you're not stuck in those thoughts and those habits. Yeah.
What a good call out. And honestly, that would be the other myth. We opened with one myth. The other myth is that there's something wrong with you if you don't naturally just change your habits when you want to. I mean, the number of people that feel like they are doing something wrong or that they're broken because they know what they want to do, but they're not following through. We are not taught this stuff. This is, one of the toughest things, one of the toughest skills. And so if you need support to do it, oh my gosh, don't look at that as a failure. Look at that as a gift you get to give yourself, that you don't have to be the one to figure it all out. And maybe there is a way that it doesn't have to feel so hard. So I love the way you said that. We're all following a framework, even if it's one that's not serving us.
This really interests me about when I was reading into you and your work, and I really wanted to ask you about the conventional medicine approach to treating autoimmune disease versus a more lifestyle, alternative approach where we're looking at all of our environmental triggers. As a doctor of pharmacy, has your perspective on the way that we should be looking at autoimmune disease, has that changed over time? And what is the place and the relationship between conventional medicine and lifestyle medicine in treating autoimmune disease?
Yeah, I'm going to answer it. But I'm also, if you are willing, if anybody wants to listen, I recorded a podcast episode on my show, Autoimmune Health Secrets, about this, that we can share the link. So if you want to hear a little bit deeper, honestly, they're synergistic, right? So too often people kind of pit those two worlds against each other, where they're either all natural and these drugs are bad, or, the narrative is just so black and white. And the truth is that there can be a time and a place for medications. There can be a time, and there's always a time and a place for our lifestyle habits. So it's not either or. It's not I'm following conventional medicine or I'm doing this naturally. I consider myself that I'm treating this naturally, but I also take a disease-modifying therapy. Now, I choose not to take some other medications that are managing symptoms, let's say for bladder or things like that. But each medication or each habit, it's a separate choice. And I just like to encourage people to get really good information as they make that choice. So maybe you have been told that these meds are dangerous. Let's get the real facts on what that looks like. What is the benefit? What is the risk? and then make that decision from a really good place. I like to call my medication that, is shown in clinical trials to um, hopefully lead to less disability, less progression. I call that my defense. I choose to take it. And then I call my habits and my lifestyle my offense. That's what I do in the 330 days plus of the year that I'm not getting labs drawn or getting an infusion or talking to a doctor. Real health is built in all those days in between. And so it's not an either or. They lift each other up in such a beautiful way. And there's no human on the planet that cannot benefit from these changes to our lifestyle, these intentional changes that help us feel better today, but ultimately function better into the future.
I can imagine when you get a diagnosis, there is extreme fatigue and it could feel really probably, I imagine, really demotivating. Would you say that that is also a barrier for people, like having the energy to make changes as well?
Yeah, I think that comes back to mindset and that belief seed that it's possible. It's possible to feel better. It's possible that what I do matters. It's possible that the things that I choose to do or not do influence my future health, influence future diagnoses. Because if we believed that, then we likely would feel more curious and open to figure out how to make it happen. And so I think sometimes the biggest barrier is thinking it's too hard or
Yeah.
thinking that it won't make a difference. And if it feels too hard, then we're not doing it right. Right? Because I mean, a big thing that I try to convey to people is we don't need extra energy. We don't need extra time. We need to figure out how to do this in the midst of our real life. And even if we do have to give a little bit of attention, and even if we do have to borrow a little bit of energy from somewhere, these are the things that it's investing our energy and our attention and our money. It's investing because that word investing implies that we are going to get a return on it in the future. We give a little bit, let's say, to exercise, or not even a full exercise, but to movement. Yes, that takes energy, but it's coming back to us a whole lot more. And we know that movement can increase our energy. And a lot of times it takes really proving it true for yourself, but that's kind of a good lead in that the third spoke is movement.
Yeah.
Movement in all forms is something that these bodies were made to do. So even with a diagnosis that limits movement or makes movement different than maybe you were able to do in the past, that doesn't mean that we write off movement. It means that we get creative and we find different ways to move, because there is not a human on the planet that does not benefit from intentionally ensuring that we keep these bodies moving.
Mm. And when we talk about movement and exercise, like what does that look like? Do you recommend physical structured exercise, but then also like throughout the day, people breaking up like sedentary time?
Yeah, those are all options that are on the table. This is what's different for most people is, again, I'm not going to hand you a workout plan. No, it's so much better when I can ask you, okay, are you sitting a lot during the day? What about strength? What about endurance? What about flexibility? What about balance? What's craving your attention right now? And what's the first thing you want to start with? So some people know, oh my gosh, I want to get strong. And they want to first make some sort of weight training or resistance training top of mind. And then from there, the overflow effect of it is pretty contagious. Then they're like, oh, I want to be stretching. I want to be doing this. And movement is one that just ends up feeling so good that we will start with where you need to start. So for some people, they are really sedentary and they may sit at a desk for 8 hours, exactly like you said. So the first step is going to be, oh, how do we get up and moving? How do we get up walking? How do we do things at the desk in real life? So all of those things that you mentioned are wonderful options that most likely we're going to incorporate all of them, but we're going to ask first, what are you needing and what would be your biggest bang for your buck?
Correct me if I'm wrong, the statistic I saw was like 80% of
Yep.
autoimmune disease patients are women. Why does this affect women so much more? What are the factors that influence that?
The person that I've learned from and listened to and read his books, his name is Gabor Mate, and he talks a lot about this, and I've learned a lot. And so just borrowing from him, women, we tend to carry a lot mentally, emotionally, and that can feel stressful. And so that's one of the big hypotheses. And again, it ties back to stress is not only a cause of autoimmunity, but it also can be an effect. So you can see how it can be either a downward spiral of, oh my gosh, I was stressed, so I have this diagnosis, then this diagnosis makes me more stressed. And so it can pull us down and create a downward spiral. In the same way, knowing that that's the pattern, finding a way to limit that chronic stress is one of the most beneficial things that we can do. And so if we can limit the stress, then it can also be an upward spiral, because then we start to feel rested and we start to recharge and we sleep better. And it's like we're planning this, but we're not. But that's the fourth spoke of the habit hub, is rest and relaxation. So the things that we intentionally do to minimize that chronic stress that is so pervasive in our world today. It does not need to be normal. It's so common, but trying something different, breaking the pattern of always being busy, always being stressed, always having to say yes to things, can be one of the most nourishing things that we can learn to do together.
Do you see that as a common personality trait across clients that are coming to you? All like yes men and
Tons of perfectionism, tons. And, I'm a recovering perfectionist as well. And so I really can relate to people, and it still creeps back up. I mean, I just ran a consistency challenge with my community, and I noticed myself, those old habits coming in of gotta do this perfectly. And so that's what is so good about this, is that we don't make it a problem if we're relearning things that we've been learning. We say, oh, good, I've tackled this before. I know what to do now. And absolutely, perfectionism is one that I'll, on a group call, we'll talk about, someone will be saying, but then this isn't perfect, or I missed this. And I'll say, can anyone else relate? And you just see heads nodding, hands going up. And so that's one of the first things. And that could be another belief seed, is that there's no such thing as perfect, right? If we recognize that, or give ourselves grace and believe that, then that's going to serve us moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like that'll be so relieving for people to hear that they don't have to be perfect in order to make changes for their health. And yeah, I love trust in the tiny, so that's like also locked in here as well.
Locked in, yes. I mean, and nothing is perfect. Look at nature. Like, nature is, I'm like staring out my window at a tree that is so crooked. And it's interesting because my husband always talks about how crooked it is. He's a perfectionist. And I'm like, Ben, it's perfect. It's not meant to be straight. And so we are nature. So look at nature. Nothing is perfect in nature, and we are nature. So just embrace our humanness and celebrate the things that are not perfect. And that's a great first start.
I love that. I was going to ask another question to end, but I feel like that is such an uplifting metaphorical end. So I'm like, yeah, thank you so much for everything that you shared.
Well, thank you. Can I say the last two spokes?
Of course, you should. Yeah.
We don't need to be perfect, but if you guys are like, oh my God, what are they? The fifth one is my favorite. It's connection, right? So part of our lifestyle is how we belong, in our relationship. So connection is a huge one. And the sixth area is something that I call good stress. And I put quote around goods because it's the short-term stresses that we take on to help ourselves grow and to challenge ourselves. So again, that's just a brief overview of the six. I actually have a quiz. It's a free quiz that it takes less than 3 minutes. It's like 7 questions, and it will tell you where you may be craving a new habit in one of these 6 areas. And again, it cuts down on that overwhelm of, she talked about 6 areas. Where in the world should I start? It will give you the answer. And so you just trust you start there. And again, trust in the tiny. I will help you with a few of these strategies from the playbook in your inbox after you take it. And I'm always just a reply away. If you have any questions, or, if something feels like, I don't know what she's talking about there, why not ask?
Thank you so much. That's awesome. And Okay, everyone's going to do the quiz. I feel like I'm going to do the quiz. Like everyone
Do
can
it.
benefit from doing the quiz. Thank you for all of your wisdom. There'll be links in the description below from the things that we mentioned today. I'll link her Instagram as well.
Cool.
Just sending hope to anyone who's, feeling like there's nothing they can do, because as Amy shared with us, there's like so many ways that we can put our best foot forward and live a healthful life.
I love that. And you have a lot of wisdom for your youth, and it's just, people are so lucky to have you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you, Amy.